All right, so thanks everybody for joining in. We are in session 7 of our series on Open Roads Designer and the project that we've been working on. The agenda for today, there's really 3 main areas where we're going to focus. First of all, we're going to look at annotation in a general context and how Open Roads Designer annotates elements. So we'll look at annotation again, try and go through, talk about how it works, go through some examples for stationing as well as labeling, stations and offsets and things like that. Then we're going to focus on plan and profiles. We'll go through the workflow for creating plan and profile sheets. I'll take you through that. We'll look at some of the details behind that. We'll look at annotating elements within the profile or the plan view, such as vertical alignments, as well as how do we use labeling to annotate particular elements within our sheets as well. And then we'll focus on cross sections finally and talk about how do I create cross sections? How do I take advantage of named boundaries? How do I incorporate skewed sections or sections at drainage structures? And then we'll look at some annotation tools within the cross sections as well, like annotating right away, placing labels and those kind of things. So the agenda again is 3 primary areas. Again, general annotation, plan and profiles, and cross sections. So let's begin, and give me a second here, and I'll move over into the software. So just kind of catching up, as I said, we are in session 7. What I wanted to do, first of all, is just, again, sort of have a recap here for a moment. If you remember, as we've gone through all of the previous sessions, we have been building this project and building this model, and now we're going to take that and we're going to build or create drawings from it, plan and profiles and cross sections specifically. So here's the project. Again, as we've gone through these sections, we've built this up. There are several areas in here. Again, I just wanted to point out where we need to pay close attention to, and then we'll jump to plan production. We see the roadway corridor. We see the intersection that's been constructed. And we had to do some work at the beginning of the model to incorporate tapers, both horizontally and vertically, so that we could tie our widened roadway section into the existing roadway section. But you can see here the property lines, the horizontal alignment, and the 3D model as well that we've created. So in context of where we are when it comes to this session, we have completely built or designed this roadway corridor. You can see that in the 3D view on the right, as well as generating the planimetric graphics, the 2D geometry that you see in the right-hand view as well. Okay, so that's kind of, again, just a brief synopsis and a recap of where we are and what we're starting with in terms of our project as we begin to look at plan production. All right, so what we're going to do from here, there are several, well, the data sets available, and I'm going to browse. I'm going to move into my data set folder here as I open up the next set of files. And again, I'm going to move into this sheets directory, and I'm going to start in the plan and profile sheet. So I'll open up the plan and profile sheet, and you'll notice in the plan and profile sheet we have the same compilation of files that we were just looking at in the model file, or the quote container file that I had open just a second ago. So we're in this plan and profile drawing, and as we begin to think about how are we going to put our sheets together, you know, and you've learned through the sessions that as Open Roads, as we built this project, we have referenced files together. When it comes to constructing sheets, it's the same process. So we rely on referencing. In our plan and profile sheets here, you'll notice I have referenced in every relevant file related to this project, okay? And this will be the DGN that we create the plan and profile sheets in. Now, before we get to creating the plan and profile sheets, there's a couple of things here I want to point out. One, you'll notice the center line has no annotation on it. So we're going to go first of all and move into that geometry file, and we're going to place some just general annotation, stationing and labeling along some horizontal elements. So I'm going to move, I'm going to browse here, and I'm going to go into that geometry file. All right. So I'm going to browse out. Again, I'm picking the file that contains my baseline. It also contains right-of-way elements also. And we're going to begin here looking at annotation in Open Roads Designer. All right. Now, this horizontal alignment, you can see that the profiles here, again, just as we have produced all of this data throughout the work or throughout the process, throughout this series of web demonstrations and workshops, all that data is here. Now, again, you see the horizontal alignment. Now, to annotate that alignment, of course, I want to see stationing, I want to see bearings and distances, I want to see PCs and PTs. So to annotate that alignment, what we want to do is I'm in the Open Roads modeling workflow, as we've been throughout the session. I'm going to go over to the Drawing Production tab. And on the Drawing Production tab, there are several tools that we'll use throughout the session. The first of those is this button called Element Annotation. So I'm going to click Element Annotation, and then I'm going to follow the prompts, and I'm going to select my alignment. Then I'll right-click, as the prompt tells me, to place the annotation on the element. And so if we zoom in now, using the Annotate Element tool, I've annotated my horizontal alignment. We see the stationing, the tick marks, again, the stationing for the PCs and bearings and distances. Those typical types of annotations that we see on a horizontal element. Now, how did this particular element know to annotate in this way? Where are the definitions of how this element should look when I apply the element annotation tool to it? So let's take a look here at some of the behind-the-scenes standards, and hopefully this will help you understand how annotation generally works. If you recall from prior sessions, every element in Open Roads Designer has a feature definition. Okay? Now, this feature definition, if we select our alignment, we look at the properties, this has a feature definition called Geom Baseline. Every element has a feature definition. That feature definition defines or calls a symbology, okay? And so if we follow the hierarchy here, let's open up alignment, and we look here at the properties. So from here, from this feature definition, a symbology is being called upon, and that from that symbology, again, I'm working my way down the hierarchy here. From that symbology, if we open up the feature symbologies available here in the file, from that symbology, as we look down through here, there are multiple settings that influence different parameters of how things display. The first, the key I want you to notice right here is the annotation group. Annotation groups in Open Roads Designer are the compilation of annotation settings. It's a group of annotation settings that define multiple properties and how they should be annotated on a single element. Okay? Now, where are these annotation groups? Well, they are default. All of the standards in Open Roads Designer by default are stored in a DGN library within our workspace initially. However, those annotation groups, if we look here in our live file, we'll notice that that annotation group, which I just used here, is written into this file. Now, if we drill in, we look into this annotation group, I can right-click on it, select Manage, and this opens up the properties or the definitions that are contained inside this annotation group. So as you look here at the dialog box along the left-hand pane, you notice that there are multiple annotation, quote, definitions that make up this overall annotation group. So there are settings here defined for minor ticks, major ticks, cardinal stations, where should the bearing be placed, what the format should be. All those settings related to how we want things to look along particular elements, okay? And again, all of these entities you see along the left-hand pane here, those are annotation definitions. Annotation definitions are bundled together, just as you see here, to create an annotation group. And the annotation group is what is specified within the symbology of an element, okay? And then the symbology is tied to the feature definition. So the hierarchy for our alignment is feature definition calls the symbology calls the annotation group. The annotation group contains the specific definitions for all of the graphics, all of the information we want displayed on an element, okay? So that's kind of the basics behind how annotation works in this instance, meaning I'm using an annotation group. Annotation groups will be used for definitions of specific elements like alignment that have multiple properties I want to turn on. Annotation groups will also be used, you'll see later on, in annotating elements within our sheets, cross-section sheets and plan and profile sheets, okay? So annotation groups are an important concept to kind of understand how they work, where they're located, and then where they're important and where they need to be available, and you need to recognize their necessity in other areas, okay? So that's kind of the basics of how this works. So I'll close that up. So again, how did an element know, how did this alignment know how to display that properties, those elements in the way that it displayed them? And that's all based off the annotation group associated to its symbology, which is associated to its feature definition. Ultimately, the key is pay attention to the feature definition and follow the path back to the annotation group, and that will be where you find any problems or where you can make changes to those settings. Okay. Now, in addition to annotating the baseline, we can go ahead. Let's annotate this right-of-way line while we're here also. So again, I can select element annotation. There's no dialog box here to specify. That's kind of the key thing to realize. So I'll select it and I can right-click, and then you'll notice it just really annotated a bearing and a distance along that right-of-way line and then specified existing right-of-way. I could do the same on the south side, and I'll just right-click and display that also. So again, taking advantage of some of the feature definitions and annotation groups, we have the ability to just place annotation specifically along certain elements, okay? Now, in addition to placing, I guess, those types of annotation groups, another thing we might want to do here is, let me kind of talk about as we build these drawings up, okay? There are multiple ways that we could go about this, just like in the way you do things, how you've done things in the past when it came to building sheets. It was an effort of building. It was an effort of putting together reference files, of managing your annotation, managing levels and the symbologies that you're using with the locations of these things. So here we have placed this annotation within the geometry DGN, okay? So the annotation that we just placed is in our geometry file with our center line, and where these other files are referenced in, you can see here as well, okay? Now, another thing I'm going to take just a moment and demonstrate, I'm going to just move off into space over here. When it comes to the annotation tools in Open Roads Designer, again, just conceptually understanding how things work, and setting the expectation for how things are going to work in Open Roads Designer when it comes to annotation and labeling. We've seen in the past, I mean, you know, Open Roads Designer is dynamic, and labeling and annotation is dynamic along with the model and the graphics in the model. So to display that, or just take a moment and demonstrate that, again, I'm just stepping off here to the side so that I can give you a moment of just kind of clarify how some of these things will work, particularly in labeling. So I'm just going to draw a baseline, okay? And it could actually be a lot shorter than that. Let's do this so we can zoom in and see a little more clearly when time comes what's going on. So we've got a horizontal line there. This could be any line. It could be a center line. It doesn't really matter. The point here is just how the annotation works, okay? And how to understand the dynamic nature of it. Some of the advantages in Open Roads Designer when it comes to annotating. So we have this baseline here, and I've just drawn a microstation line. This line could be another civil or Open Roads geometry element, or it could be a microstation line. It really doesn't matter. Now, say, for example, we wanted to place a station and offset along this. Again, assuming this is a right-of-way line or something, okay? Now, back on the Drawing Production tab, we can go to Place Label, and I'm going to just look in the Place Label settings. I'm going to set the type to Cell, and I'm going to click this down arrow. Now, I'm selecting pre-built settings, and these are all contained, as I mentioned before, in a DGN library in our workspace behind the scenes. Now, I'm in Plan View, and I want to place a label in Plan View, so I'm just going to look down the list, and I'm going to select Plan, Station, and Offset. And now I need to follow the prompt in the lower left corner, and I'll select the baseline that's going to be the basis of my stationing and my offset, and then I'll snap to the end point of that graphic and data point. So it's picking up the stationing and it's picking up the offset based off of that selected horizontal alignment, and I can do the same on the opposite end. Okay, so that's easy enough. That's placing that label. But what happens when things change? How do the labels react when I make changes? You'll notice as I move this baseline around, let's just pull it up here close, you'll notice that the labels are changing based off of the movement of the baseline. Okay? The same is true if this graphic changed, the right-of-way changed, you'll notice that the label moves with it as well. So all of the labels that we're creating are dynamically associated to the graphics or the points to when we create them. Another common scenario is if we need to modify the label. So I can pick that label up and move it around, and the leader remembers where it's associated to, what elements it's associated to. So that gives us more flexibility also when it comes time to move those labels around so we don't have overlapping text and things like that, and we need to move around to clean up our sheets and make things look neat. Okay? So I just want to take a moment to sidestep and give you that quick demonstration. Everything you see here that I demonstrated propagates through our actual project. Okay, so all of the labels that we've placed so far will be dynamic in nature. If something changes, the labels will change to go along with it. Okay? All right, so continuing in our line of thinking, again, we're building up to create plan and profile sheets. And for time's sake, there's only so much I can do here as far as annotation goes, but I've annotated the baseline, we've annotated the existing right-of-way. So now let's move back, and I want to take a look and move back into the plan and profile sheets. And we're going to look at actually constructing those plan and profile sheets. So I'm going to move back into the plan and profile start.dgn. And once I'm back in here, we'll go through the process and actually construct plan and profile sheets. Now you'll notice here, since I made the change, back in the geometry file, I've annotated with stations and I've annotated the existing right-of-way. That, of course, is carried forward via the references into this sheet where I'm currently residing. Okay? Now, there are other things here realistically that we would have to do in real life. Again, because of our time frame, I'm not going to delve into that. I want you to understand that when it comes to certain things like, dimensioning, for example, the microstation tools for dimensioning are all the same. So in terms of placing a dimension, whatever that may be, between 2 points, along an element, those are all the same. So I could place a dimension, again, considering where I'm going to place that dimension, what file is it going to reside in, all that can be done directly as well, okay? So when it comes to producing plans, and let's see what we got here. When it comes time to produce plans, the workflows in some instances, such as dimensioning, are the same as what we have done in the past, okay? And hopefully that's a legitimate scale. And so again, we could just click through here. I don't have, I'd have to go back and set the settings up to be perfect. And we could just jump, and I'll just do it quickly. So clearly I would modify that. I have 4 decimal places. But the point here I want to make is that labeling, taking advantage of Open Roads labeling to extract data from the design model, that's one important method for annotating. Annotating elements globally or in a bulk fashion, that's another method, but you combine those along with just the typical annotating type of tools we might have done in the past with MicroStation. That's all part of the workflow here, okay? And it's all available to you in Open Roads Designer. All right, so we've kind of got our plans put together here. We've done a bit of plan annotation along the way, and so I just kind of want to set the stage here. And so now, really, how do we create the sheets? Okay, now I'm going to go through some steps here, and so follow along with me because these are important steps, and they're going to help you be more efficient when it comes time to create sheets. Okay, so we've referenced all of our files together. That's the first point. All these files are referenced together, whatever they may be, and you know that can vary sheet to sheet, and we can add more later if we want to. The first thing I want to do is go over under my attributes. I want to turn on the constructions. And there's a purpose for this, okay? I had it off for a reason, and I'm turning it on for a reason, just to explain something to you. So I've turned on the constructions, and then just to save a few steps, I'm going to go to File, click Save Settings, so I don't have to turn constructions on and constructions off. Now, why did I do that? Ultimately, as we've learned, as we've gone through Open Roads Designer, as we've looked at this workflow, you remember there are graphical elements in the plan view for interacting with the model. There are graphics for interacting with the roadway corridor, for interacting with template drops, and so forth. Those are not necessarily graphics I want to see. Those are construction graphics, but I don't necessarily want to see them in my plan view of my sheets. Okay? So I'm turning constructions on so I can see that Open Roads data, and when I create the sheet boundaries, you'll see why as well. But now, importantly, how do I keep those from being displayed in my sheets when I get there? What I'm going to do, I'm going to go up into my reference files. I'm going to select every reference file that I have attached, and I'm going to make just a bulk change to the references. And again, the point here is for you to be able to manage the display of the construction elements in your sheets most effectively. So I select all of my references. I'll click Presentation. I want to turn on Use View Flags, meaning I get to control what's on or off based off of these settings. Be sure Constructions is turned off. I'm applying this to every reference file attached. And go ahead and click on Line Weights, and then click OK. All right? And again, we're making a bulk global change to reference file settings to manage the construction or the display of construction elements when we create our sheets. Okay, that's the point here. All right, now let's get ready to create our sheets. So we've got a plan layout, we've got the alignment, we got the data we needed. When it comes to creating sheets, all of the methodologies in Open Roads Designer, whether it's sections or plan and profiles or plans or profiles, are all based on what we call named boundaries. So under the Drawing Production tab, I'm going to go over select Named Boundary. And under Named Boundary, I'm going to select Place Named Boundary. Okay? Now, the named boundary that we're going to place, and you'll understand this in just a second, represents the view. It represents the clipping view or the clipping area of our drawing that's going to be placed on the sheet. When it comes to named boundaries, you'll notice there's settings, or there's a method here for creating named boundaries in plan view, for creating named boundaries by just an element, meaning I drew a shape. And then there are profile named boundaries, there are cross-section named boundaries, and then there are named boundaries for 2 points, meaning I just create a cross-section more or less between 2 points. And we'll look at that too in just a little bit also, as well as some other ways to just create them freely within the drawing file and put them on your sheets. Now, since we're doing plan and profiles, we're going to begin in the plan. So we want to create a plan view named boundary. Now, if I click the plan view, the first important thing to realize is the selection of what's called a seed, a drawing seed. Now, what you see in the drop-down menu is based off of what we call a sheet seed file. These, again, are what you see here is predefined, delivered with Open Roads Designer, and they are stored in the workspace in the DGN library behind the scenes. These definitely can be modified to meet your standards. The sheet seeds that we're looking at here, the drawing seeds, contain the scale of your drawing. You know, is it an ANSI D or ANSI C? What is it? What's your border? It defines the border that you want to use, okay, along with some other settings. But we need to select the proper seed file to begin. Now, we're creating plan and profile sheets, and we're creating the plan view for plan and profile sheets. So we're going to select ANSI D plan profile plan because we're creating the plan view of a plan and profile sheet. Hopefully that made sense. So we select the proper drawing seed. I'm going to leave the scale set the same. And this is I'll leave the name set to what it defaulted to. The group is important. And you can give this a custom name, but it's going to pick up the name of the alignment in just a second when I get to the point of selecting the element, okay, to create the sheets along. This is a group that defines this group of boundaries that's going to be created. So I'm going to move the cursor out into the screen, and you'll notice it's telling me to pick the element that I want to define my borders along or my named boundaries along. So I'm going to pick the baseline. Okay, I want to go along that alignment, and now I'm getting a rubber banding line. And notice that my start station is varying. So I can graphically pick that start station, and this will be the start of the boundary that's going to be on the sheets, or I can key it in. I'm just going to move over here and key it in. Okay, so I'll key in my start station. Down in the lower left, I'll follow the prompts and data point. And now, if I zoom out, you can see those boundaries being created based off of the settings that are predefined. Okay, so I'm moving along the alignment. You can see the views that are going to be created and placed on my plan and profile sheets. Now I can modify those, okay? So I could change the scale along the way, and we'll see how the sheets sizes change along the alignment based off the scale that I select. Okay, so you can modify these settings. Okay, we're going to stay at a 50 scale, and then I'm going to create these boundaries, and then we'll move to the next step for the profile. So I'll follow the prompt, and I'll move to the very end, and I'll data point, okay? And then I'll data point once more to accept the placement of these boundaries. Now, what has happened? In my file, there have been a group, Highway 72. It selected that name based off the alignment, and there's my 3 plan view named boundaries, okay? So it has created 3 named boundaries for my plan view along my corridor and along my alignment here, okay, and stored them away for me. All right, now we're creating plan and profile views, okay? We're creating plan and profile sheets, okay? And it's, we can talk about this toward the end depending on time. The same, yes, we're creating plan and profile sheets, but notice there are definitions included here for just plan view for maintenance of traffic, which we can look at in a little bit as well. If you need just plan sheets, so there's a sheet seed for that, or if you do plan, meaning a plan on the top of the sheet and a plan on the bottom. Okay, so there are standards available delivered for just plan views. Again, this could be traffic control plans or maintenance of traffic, depending on which terminology you use. It could be phasing, it could be signing and striping, it could be whatever. Okay, now let's look at the profile. Now we're creating plan and profile sheets. Notice we don't have any named boundaries in our profile groups at this point. So how do we create those? Well, first of all, we need to open up the profile view along our alignment. Okay. Now to open that profile view, I select the horizontal, and I'm just going to open up view 2 in this case and data point in it. All right. So we have, remember here, we've got named boundaries, 3 named boundaries created for the plan view based off of definite scale and stationing that I've specified. Now we want to sync those up with our profile view. So I'll go back, open up the named boundary dialog box. We're going to use the profile method. So I'll select profile here. Once again, first step, key step, is to select the drawing seed. And so I want to select ANSI D plan profile. So this is creating a profile of a plan and profile sheet. So the spacing, the settings, the location of this boundary are all set up on my sheet seed to show up below the plan view. Okay, notice in here there are additional sheet seeds or drawing seeds for, again, if you just want to put a profile on a sheet, or you want to do a profile with frame annotation, or frame annotation based off rail infrastructure. There are multiple sheet seeds available to you. And again, these can all be customized. You can use what we provide you as a basis, customize those to your own standards. Okay, but we're going to select this. We're creating the profile view of the sheet. Of a sheet, a plan and profile sheet. We'll leave the scale 1 to 50, so we sync up with our prior views. Now, the key thing here is the method. We want to make sure the method is set to from plan group, and we want to be sure in the drop-down menu that we select our pre-built plan group from our plan views. Okay, so it's going to take the settings from the plan view and apply them to the profile. Okay, all right. The other settings I'm going to leave the same. There are multiple settings down here for clearances on both the top and the bottom of the boundary that we create. There's exaggeration settings and so forth. There's settings here for how I want to shift the sheets based off of the terrain model. If the terrain model is there's a lot of vertical in the terrain model, we can shift the sheets based off of that, or the boundaries based off of that. I'm going to leave them as they are default, and I'm going to follow the prompts, okay? And I'll click in the view, in the profile view, and now you see the 3 named boundaries that are created, again, based off of the plan views that we created in the first step. And then I'll data point once more to accept them. And so now we have named boundaries in the profile view and named boundaries in the plan view, and they are linked. So I'm going to go here to actually build the sheets. I'm going to go back here, and I may have went a little fast on that. Let me pause for a moment here. I'm going to click this little down arrow, and I'm going to open up what's called the Named Boundary Manager, okay? And the Named Boundary Manager basically contains and shows us all of the named boundaries within our file, okay? So in this case, we created the plan group, and now we have created the profile group here below. And these named boundaries are here. You can turn them on, turn them off. Anyway, you can interact with them in different ways. Okay, so they're there, they're stored, and they're available. They're actually available for use in other DGNs, so we could reference those together in another DGN and use them as the basis of other sheets that we create. But that's a side note. Here's where we are. We've created the plan views, we've created the profile views, and now, the first time I saw this, my thought was, how do I put these together? How do I get that profile named boundary on the sheet with the plan named boundary, and vice versa? You'll remember we created the profile views from the plan boundaries. That created a link, which makes our life much easier. Now, before we go any farther, I want to be sure and click this button because I want to show you the dialog box for creating these drawings. And then I'll just simply right-click. I'm going to right-click on my group, okay? And from here, I can select Create Plan Profile Drawing. And so I'll just click that button. And now this opens up the Create Drawing dialog box. And again, I wanted to open this up just to, again, show you where a lot of the settings and these things are coming from. Now, these could be modified. We have built these named boundaries to function properly on the profile sheets. So some of these settings shouldn't be changed, okay? But we could make modifications to them as we go down through the list. I want you to be aware of 2 main points here. One is that we have settings for a drawing model, and we have settings for a sheet model. And we'll see those in practical life, in real life, in just a second. But there's a drawing model that'll be created and a sheet model. Also note the annotation group. As we looked at previously, annotation groups are used throughout Open Roads Designer. Okay, so we've got a plan annotation group for the plan view, which is here on the left. Okay, this is the plan on the left. The profile view settings are on the right. And again, we've got a drawing model and a sheet model for the profile and the annotation group. And that annotation group is selected here, and I can browse down and select whatever suits me, okay? And then from here, I'm going to click and add these to the sheet index. And the sheet index we'll look at in depth in a little bit as well, okay? And now I'm going to click OK to that and let this process. Now, as it's going through and it's processing here, again, it's looking at the plan view. It's looking at the named boundaries in the plan view, along with the named boundaries in the profile view, clipping those out, putting them together based off the sheet seed into sheets. So here here we see one of the sheets. This is the last sheet in the set, Plan 3. You can see that it's been created. And again, a few points here just to point out. One, on the profile, you notice that annotation was placed on the vertical alignment elements, and it was done automatically. How did it happen automatically? Remember, the annotation group that we select, in this case, for these sheet settings, are built to look at vertical alignment information and annotate those elements that it sees in the profile window. It also placed graphics for strip grades, and we can see those here along the bottom also. Okay? Now, additionally, let's look at the plan view. The plan view, if you recall, if we go back and look at our plan view here, and remember, we talked about all of this construction graphics that were displayed originally, meaning I had all the graphics for the corridors, all the graphics for template drops and other construction type graphics, and we turned all those off in the references. We did that so that our resulting sheet view, if I jump back here, okay, sheet 2, so that the view displayed in plan view in my sheets is cleaned up. It's not showing me all of those construction settings or those construction graphics in my sheet view. Okay. Now, at this point, I could go a step farther, and this could be done at multiple places. I mean, I can come in here and I can make modifications. Do I want to make modifications in the sheet, however? I am in the sheet. Remember, I pointed out that there's going to be a sheet model created, which is what we're looking at now. But in addition to the sheet model, there's actually a sheet view created also, or a drawing model created for each view also. Okay, so here on this particular, if we wanted to make an annotation to sheet 2, let's say we're just going to put a call out real quick on these 2 points of right of way here at the intersection, and we wanted to annotate those with station and offset. I could go into my drawing model. Okay, so I've moved into the drawing model. This is the drawing model between the design model and the sheet model. I could actually make the annotation here if I wanted to. So remember the tools that we looked at previously. I could go and place label. I could place, let's pick a cell, and for the particular settings that I want to use, let's label the plan, station, and offset. So I'll select that, and then I need to follow my prompt. What stationing or what element am I basing the stationing off of? Let me make sure I select the horizontal alignment. Okay, I'm just hovering over it there to make sure it is the horizontal alignment. Then I'll select it, because again, this is the basis of my annotation that I'm placing. And then I can just draw that label out and place it, and I can do the same on the opposite side. Okay, now remember, all of these graphics can be moved and manipulated. Again, when it comes time to produce the drawings and I'm moving text around trying to find a place to locate them and make them nice and neat, that's when that becomes handy. Okay, so in this case, we've used labeling of elements back through our reference files, and we use that in the drawing model. Okay, so again, think about annotating elements like this when it comes to, I don't know, annotating specific things, whether it's station offset or placing dimensions or placing a specific note that you want to see in the file. This is probably really big. We could change the text. If we need to just place, text for particular things, that can all be done. And I can't type. That could all be done in this drawing model. Okay. And then that, of course, is then carried through to the actual sheet. So if we look back at the sheet, there's our text. Okay, so again, it's really similar to what we've done in the past, except now we have much more dynamic interaction, but it is a compilation effort. Now, I clicked a button to include those sheets in the sheet index, okay? Now, the sheet index resides here, and I have many sheets in here because I've done this multiple times in this work set. And so what's happening here, I can jump to the sheet. What's happening in this sheet index, the sheet index is creating a compilation of all of the sheets that I'm going to create in this project. And it's putting them in this sheet index in a single location. Doesn't matter what DGN they live in, doesn't matter what directory they live in. It only matters that they are the same in the same, quote, work set that we call it now, which is equal to a project. Okay? So that becomes very handy for us as well. All right, so that's plan and profile sheets. Again, that's the fundamentals of creating plan and profile sheets. Now let's look at cross sections. Okay? So we're going to move from our plan and profile drawing here, and let's go look at let's browse, and we'll go look at our cross-section drawing. Now, I divided these up just to keep it clear as to what we were doing. Plan and profile in one place, cross-section sheets in another, okay? They function, or the premise behind, or really the workflow behind both is pretty straightforward. Well, it's very similar. And so we're going to go through that now. Let me open up the 3D view. And all right, so we've got the 3D view opened, and let's just tile, and let me go and do File, Save Settings. When it comes time to create cross-section sheets, we have to have a 3D view, okay? Because the cross-sections we're creating are based off of the 3D model that we've generated previously. So we need that 3D view, and I've opened both up here, the 2D and the 3D, so you can see what's going on. All right, now let's get ready to create the sheets. And we can go through kind of the same workflow, I guess you'd say. When it came time to create these, just as we've done in the past, you might want to turn things off. So here, for example, I might want to turn off any particular reference file. It could be multiple reference files that I don't want to see. So I could turn off, in this case, I'll just turn off the property lines. That's easy enough to do. And then we have construction elements here displayed. I can turn those on or turn those off. This is a little different scenario because the cross sections are going to come from the 3D view rather than the plan view. So the construction elements in the plan view are not as critical to me in this case. Okay? Now, when it comes time to create the cross section sheets, we go over to the Drawing Production tab. Okay? And we are going to create named boundaries just as we did in the Plan and Profile section. So I'll go to the Named Boundary tool. I want to select Civil Cross Section, and then I'll work my way through the dialog box just as in the other situations. We're going to select the proper drawing seed, which is I'm picking what's delivered here. ANSI D cross section. The scale, we'll leave that at 1 to 10. And then we're going to create a new group, okay? And this, again, is a group of named boundaries that will end up being the cross-section views on our sheets, okay? So I'm going to follow down through the prompts. Before I do that, I want to point out a couple things here before I pick the alignment and set the stations and the intervals up. An important thing to consider as you work down here, one, you'll see there are settings for the right and left offset. What interval do I want to use to create these sections? Is it 50? Is it 100? What's the interval I'm using? The vertical exaggeration can be specified here, so we could exaggerate this to 2 if we wanted to. But an important thing here also is this clearance setting. If you want to be sure that you have enough space on your cross-section view within your boundary at the top or the bottom, meaning I got to annotate some structures underneath the roadway, so I need a big enough clearance underneath, or I've got some annotation above the roadway for offsets and elevation or whatever it may be. I need to specify a top clearance so that I have enough room in that boundary. It also plays into the spacing of the sheets or the spacing of the views on the sheets. Okay, so I've turned top clearance on, and now I'm going to follow the prompts here. I'm going to pick the alignment. That's the basis of my sections. And you can see I've got a rubber banding line here, and I can graphically pick something if I want. I'm going to stick with the station we've been using as our start, 505 plus 00. Then I click the tab key to specify that, and then I left click in the screen to accept it. Okay, and now you'll notice as I move my cursor along the alignment, you can see planimetrically where those named boundaries or where those sections are going to be created. And so I'm just going to pull this down, down to the end, and I'm going to stop it just as we've done the others at 543.00. Okay, now there's the preview of the named boundaries that'll be created. To accept that preview, I'll data point, and then that will accept them, and I'll data point once more, and that will create them. Now, in the 3D model view, you can see the results. You can see each of the named boundaries in that 3D model view. You can see where it exists. You can see the elements in the model that it crosses, and that will influence, well, that will directly be, I kind of say generally, these are windows into the design model. And so these affect or are basically the windows that control what our cross sections are going to look like. Okay? All right. Now, so we've got a set of typical named boundaries created. Again, these are every 100 feet along the roadway corridor. But what happens in those instances where I need extra sections? At driveways, at intersections, at skewed areas. So in this case, we're going to incorporate, let's move the view here just a little. There's an area, there's a box culvert that goes under our project. If we look toward the left-hand side of the corridor, the western side, you'll see the head wall that passes under the roadway from here, north to south or south to north. And so I need a cross-section there. So I need to incorporate an extra section at that location. So I'll go back to named boundaries, okay? And rather than using this button, we're going to use cross-section by 2 points. All right? Now, I want to be sure and select the proper group. I want to include this in Highway 72, okay? So I am appending or inserting or adding, however you want to, terminology you want to use, this specific section into my list of named boundaries, okay? So I'm going to click that. I'm going to be sure that I include it in my Highway 72 group. I need to pick the alignment. That's the baseline. So I'll select that. And then I need to pick just the points from which I want to, or that'll be the basis for the correct section. So again, I'm kind of eyeballing this, but I'm going to just draw this across from head wall to head wall to get the section in. Anybody see the head wall? I've lost it. There it is. Okay. And so I'll pull this across there, and I'll data point and then data point once more to accept it. You can see that named boundary has been created in the view. Okay. And now I've got additional sections that I need to include as well. So I'm going to pan down the roadway here, and I've got just a drainage structure. Let's move along the model and find our location. I've got a drainage structure here that I need to include also on a section. So I'm going to use the same tool. I'm going to make sure that it's in the same group, and I'm going to follow the same process or the same prompts or the same steps. So I'm going to data point. Let me pick the alignment once more. Make sure I've got the right graphic. All right, I want to be sure I've got the actual baseline graphic. Select that, and then I'll pick the edge of the section that way. And then let's just keep this kind of short, and I'm going to stop it there. Again, I'll data point to accept it. And so now we've included an additional named boundary along that drainage structure. If we go now and look at our named boundary manager, we can see that they have been inserted in there. There's the section for our box culvert. You can see it highlighted there. So by building this list it has inserted those additional sections, whether it's skewed, whether it's perpendicular, whether it's at a particular structure, or wherever it happens to be, it has inserted those properly into our list. Okay? So it's building this named boundary list in a sequential manner based off the stationing of the sections that we've defined. Okay? Now, how do I create the sheets? So let's take the next step. We know that creating the named boundaries is the first step, so that I've created those windows into my design model. Now I'm going to open up once more. I'll click this little button in the lower right-hand corner. I want to be sure and turn on the Create Sheets button. I want to be able to see the settings and before I create the sheets. Again, we've looked at the cross-section groups, where we see all the named boundaries that we've created for this particular set. And then I'm just going to right-click on that group and select Create Cross-Section Drawing. And this opens up the dialog. And again, just as we've looked at before, this is where the settings are stored. I can make modifications. You'll remember there's a drawing model, even for the sections, and there's a sheet model. Notice the annotation group here. I'm actually going to change that at this point. So I'll select the down arrow, look into my standards for annotation group, and I'm going to select just cross-section grid. Okay? And we're going to look at doing this kind of in a methodical step-by-step manner for annotation. And then I'll say OK to that. These are being added to the sheet index also. So right now, Open Roads Designer is looking through those named boundaries. It's more or less slicing through the model at those stations and those named boundaries, clipping them out and placing them on the sheets based off of the standards that are defined in the sheet seed, as well as those standards that are defined in my annotation group and the other standards that we defined on the dialog box for scales and clearances and so forth. Okay? So again, it's working its way through these named boundaries and it's generating those sheets. So we'll give it just a second to finish that up. Now, in thinking about what's going on here, these sheets are being created in this DGN as separate models. I know we've been asked many times about, can I put sheets in separate DGNs? We are working on that in the next release to be able to take sheets and place them not in multiple models in the DGN, but to divvy them out amongst multiple DGNs. And we can address that in a little more depth. Joe and Chuck are on the line, and so we could talk about that when we get to Q&A as well. But that is on the roadmap and forthcoming in upcoming release. So here we are. We've got the cross sections created, and you can see here the sheets as they appear one by one by one. Again, I turned on the sheet index. The sheet index compiles all of these drawings, and I've run through this multiple times earlier today, and well, this is all from earlier today, I'm guessing. And so all of the sheets that I've created under this project, or work set as it's called now in the newer versions, are compiled together in this sheet index. It doesn't matter, again, what file they're in. That doesn't matter. This just gives us the opportunity to jump from sheet to sheet, from place to place, and I've moved those files. And so we can jump around and again, take advantage of this without having to necessarily browse from drawing to drawing and sheet to sheet, okay? So I can jump from my sections that were just created. I can jump back into my plan and profile sheets that we created 20 minutes ago in a separate file, okay? All right, so again, take advantage of sheet index. That is an easy way to maneuver and move around in the files. I'm going to move back now, and I'm going to just use the down arrow or the back and forth arrow here. I'm going to just jump right back into my cross-section file so that we can continue here. All right, so we're back here. We're in our cross-section DGN, and let's say here I need to do a little bit of further annotation. Let me go pick a sheet view, and let's go find, I should have paid attention to the station where the drainage structure happened to be. Here's the section at our intersection. So station 521 was cut at the area where we built our intersection and our crossover. You can see, again, it sliced the model. It's got the roadway corridor graphics along with the intersection and crossover model that we built in previous sessions, and there's a drainage pipe underneath. Okay, so if we need to annotate that, for example, I want to move to the view or the drawing model for that particular sheet view or that clipped cross-section view. So I'm going to move down. This was station 521. I'm going to jump into the station 521 drawing model. And just as before, I can place label here, select the proper label that we want to use. I want to be sure that I'm in the cross section, so I'm looking at label XS for cross section, and we can do offset and elevation, for example. So I'll select that label, then move into the cross section, and let's just, again, this is kind of a quick example, but let's say I need to annotate the invert of that pipe. I can just select it and data point. And so that's a quick labeling effort. And these labeling tools can be used all across here in multiple places. So we can place those anywhere. Okay. Now, another important thing here to point out is, I guess there's two types of labeling. One is labeling as I've shown you here, meaning using labels, place label for those specific locations. Maybe we want to annotate the right-of-way along this as well. And so we want to take advantage of sort of a group bulk annotation methodology. So when I built these sheets, remember, I placed just the grid in the sheets. I annotated them with only the grid, which you see, but let's say I want to come back and annotate them with more information. So I'll move into the drawing model, and I'm only going to do this for one section at this point in time, just for time's sake. I see we're at the hour. I'm going to go to Model Annotation, and this is a bulk tool for bulk annotation of a model, in this case, a drawing model. I'm going to select the annotation group I want to use. We used cross-section grid originally. Now I want to actually annotate just some basic annotation across the roadway surface. So I select the annotation group, and I'll data point once again to accept it. Okay? And so there, I messed something up. I must have clicked something incorrect here. Let's see. And possibly I have, let's see. Maybe I picked the wrong one. And possibly I have clicked the wrong one. That could have been my mistake. The point here is that using model annotation allows us to layer the annotation, meaning we could have multiple sets of model annotation. So we could display the grid, we could display the right-of-way, we could display cross slopes or points and so forth in order to just build that annotation up in a bulk manner. Okay? So I know we are close to the time. Let's go take a look at that one section, and then we'll take a few minutes and we will look we'll address Q&A. So if we look at this final set of sections here, you can see the structures present, and I must have gotten off of the pipe when I did this. You can see the structures here for the inlet, and I just kind of drew that haphazardly, so it's very possible I missed it. And you can see the outfall structure present in the cross section. And the point here is you can see the bridge structure as well. So the cross sections that we create, dynamic cross sections as well as planned production cross sections, are based off of the 3D model. If it is displayed in the 3D model, and that can be displayed via referencing, doesn't matter where it came from, it will display in the cross sections as well. Okay? So that's a key concept to understand when it comes to creating cross sections and cross section sheets, is just understanding that it is based strictly off the model.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.